It's John from What Up, and welcome back to the video, and this will be my Season 2, Episode 4 breakdown of Sony and Amazon's Wheel of Time show. If you're new to the channel and you don't know what my breakdowns are, basically I walk through the episode start to finish, and we go through all of the scenes, we kind of explain some things that are happening there, I give my own thoughts on what's going on, compare it to the book series and where they're getting inspiration from certain storylines, or which storylines parallel other storylines within the books, and I also explain some stuff that happens that maybe isn't as explained implicitly on screen. So if you like that sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'm also doing reviews and Easter egg videos for every single episode of Season 2, and I'm also still covering all of the news for Season 2 and Season 3, and yes, we are still releasing Season 3 leaks. There should be a few of them coming your way after the end of Season 2. Alright, all of that being said, before we jump into the video, I have to give a bit of a spoiler warning because we are talking a breakdown of the actual episode, and I'm going to reference the books as well. So, spoiler warning, if you have not seen the first season and the first 4 episodes of Season 2 of Sony and Amazon's Wheel of Time show, or have not read the entire Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, that's the Eye of the World all the way up to and including A Memory of Light, be forewarned, I'm going to ruin plot points and character arcs from both of those mediums. Alright, in the opening scene, we get to see Ashamel releasing Lanfear from the Dark One's prison. Now, this is pretty interesting because it's not something we ever actually get to see in the book series. And of course, in the show, they've changed the way the seals work just a little bit. And I think it works a little bit better visually for what we're going to see on screen. So, to explain what's going on here, we kind of have to explain what's going on in the books, and then we'll parallel the two of them. So essentially, the Dark One was trapped outside of the pattern, essentially. He was in a different dimension, if you will, and then some very ambitious Aes Sedai during the Age of Legends bored into his prison because they thought that he was a separate source of power that both men and women can use. And while they weren't wrong, it was the Dark One, and he started causing all kinds of problems, as he would. So what happened at the end of the War of Power is Lews Therin took his 100 companions, and they used just the male half of the True Source to seal him back up in his prison. Now you remember, they didn't make the prison whole, they didn't push him back in and then make it seamless, they put a patch on it, and that patch the Dark One could touch. And that's what caused the counterstroke that tainted the male half of the True Source and caused all the male Aes Sedai to go mad, and that's why in the show, no men use the power, except so far that we've seen Logain and Rand, and there are other ones we're going to meet, of course, throughout the series, but that's the important part. Now, when that patch was put back on his prison, there were 7 focal points to it, and these were 7 seals. They're made out of heartstone, which is mentioned in this particular episode. We'll talk about that later on, and it was mentioned in the last episode as well, which is essentially unbreakable. Anything used against it only makes it stronger, including the 1 power. However, these were just focal points for the seals. The seals were never truly explained in great detail other than the fact that it was a seal on his prison, and the focal point was this little tiny disc that you could kind of carry around with you. And they got lost, and other people picked them up, and all kinds of things happened with them. But in the show, it seems like those little seals are going to be replaced by giant seals. For example, this moon dial outside Cairhien, we've seen the big seal at the Eye of the World that was Ashamel's. They look to be giant, actual, physical platforms or carvings, and as they break, the Forsaken are released. Now, I don't know if this is going to be a concurring theme in the show that we're going to actually see Forsaken being released, but this is something we didn't get to see in the book. So Shamiel's using the 1 power. He basically pushes the 1 power into the moon dial and causes it to crack further, and that releases Lanfear from the Dark One's prison. You got to remember, when Lews Therin sealed up the Dark One in his prison, every single one of the Forsaken happened to be at Sheol in a meeting, and that's how they all kind of got thrown into that as well and sealed up with him, and that's why they weren't destroyed or taken to trial or anything else happened to them afterwards. They were sealed up with him, that's how they can be released. So I think we're going to see something similar in the show, where we're going to see sort of every season maybe a Forsaken or 2 released in this sort of way by someone else, and they're going to terrorize their local area where they're released. Alright, so the next scene we have is Moiraine making it to Cairhien and actually meeting with her family. This is pretty interesting because we didn't get a whole lot of mention of Moraine's family in the books, other than in passing here and there in different passages. There was, of course, a whole lot of mention about King Lamon, who we'll talk about much later on in the show. So, essentially, this is setting up something a little bit different. We never actually seen Moiraine interact with her family in the book series, and this lady we have here is her, in the books, her older sister. Now, they've kind of swapped that and made it her younger sister here, so Moiraine looks to be much younger than her, even though she is technically younger than Moiraine. They started to play this up, the aging or the slowed aging of the Aes Sedai a fair bit in the show. Now, I've had a few people mention in the comments down below, what about the agelessness? I keep forgetting that some people who have read the books don't really follow every single little aspect about the show. Long before season 1 ever came out, 2 things were mentioned. Agelessness was just completely scrapped, and so were the water cloaks. They were both too expensive to do on screen for such little payback, or I guess you would say. They are integral in a number of different plot lines, but it's easily explained away and easily kind of ignored or cut out completely. So when we get to much later on in the book series, when we start talking about the kin, if they are included in the show, I don't think agelessness is even going to be mentioned, but the oaths may be brought up as being a way to kind of reduce their lifespan. But either way, what we're seeing here is I think we're seeing Moiraine taking the place of Tom. Now you got to remember, in the book series, Tom was the one that Rand met in Cairhien. Tom kind of guided him through Dustimar, or the Game of Houses, and guided him to get an actual invitation to Lord Barthane's manor, trying to find the Horn of Valir and the dagger, of course, for Matt. We ended up finding a way gate where it was taken through, and all that led to another way of him getting to Tomon Head. Now, we know that Tom is not going to be in this season. For those of you who aren't aware, there were a lot of scheduling conflicts with Alexander William, the actor who plays Tom, so he's not filmed for season 2. We will see him again in season 3. He's already been on set a fair bit for that particular season. So I think what we're seeing here is they're setting up Maureen's family as sort of an in for Rand, so he can get into the royal culture within Cairhien, and that's going to be very, very important much later on when he starts kind of amalgamating the nations under his rule. What's really interesting about this next scene with Nynaeve and Egwene is we're actually starting to see some growth from Nynaeve's character much earlier than we do in the book series. Now, in the book series, Nynaeve was pretty much a bully, and not that she ever really totally grew out of it, but she had a hard time with emotions and a hard time with softness for other people. She had a hard time with a lot of different things. Now, Egwene was never included in that, neither were her close friends, but she didn't showcase any emotion other than pure anger very often outwardly in the book series. She did eventually grow as a character much later on, came into her own, especially when she got together with Lan, which I think is also being completely accelerated in the show. But what we're seeing here is a much more mature Nynaeve. Now, we don't see a whole lot of her here, but you understand that she's gone through a ton of trauma in the Arches. Egwene is comforting her, and she is sort of kind of accepting the comfort, but not really. And that's a great thing about her characters in the book series. She tried to go it alone so often, but she was always at her absolute best when she allowed her friends to help her. And you get to actually read into the inner monologue she had when that happened, and how she was maybe not as strong as she could have been, because she should be in control and protect everyone all the time. But we're seeing a much accelerated version of that here. I think they're using the trauma of the Arches to really push that with her character. All right, so this storyline is sort of infamous with the fans this season, but this is Lan with Alana Sedai. So essentially what's going on here is a couple of different things, but I do want to say that this is fairly book accurate. Lan is acting the way he did in the book series, if you take into account the storylines that they're adapting here. So essentially what happened in the show is, in the end of season 1, Moiraine had masked his bond, so he couldn't feel her, couldn't know where she was, couldn't tell her thoughts or emotions, and she went off on her own. Then she lost the ability to channel. Using my words very carefully here, because we really truly don't know at this point if Shamiel tied a shield off on her, which mirrors a couple of different storylines in the book series, or if he actually cut her off from the true source permanently, which I don't think there's a whole lot of evidence for, but a lot of people seem to like that idea. Either way, the bond was masked, and it can't be unmasked at this point. So it wasn't actually ripped from him, it wasn't snapped, and Maxim states this a couple of different times during this episode, so it's not like he lost his Aes Sedai, but he still did lose her. So in the book series, there are 2 separate storylines where Lan is acting like this, like I mentioned earlier, and the first one happens during The Dragon Reborn. It's between him and Moiraine. Essentially, they're just bickering. They're fighting a whole lot. The bond is chafing. Lan realizes he's in love with Nynaeve and is starting to want other things in his life for the first time, so they tend to argue, and he basically acts like a petulant child a fair bit in that book. Not the calm, cool, collected, stoic Lan that a lot of people seem to think he should be. So what we're seeing here are emotional outbursts from him, likely due to the fact that he's got some inner turmoil between his quest, Moiraine, and Nynaeve. The second storyline that I think they're adapting here is a storyline where, in the book series, Moiraine, for all intents and purposes, dies. Now, don't get too excited. She doesn't actually die, but she does, for everyone around her, appear to be dead, and then she comes back much later on. And when she dies, she does something that is generally unheard of, and that is pass the bond with Lan onto someone else, basically without his permission. This someone else happens to be another Aes Sedai of the Green Aja, which Alana is, and her name is Moiraine. Now, Moiraine is an expert in keeping warders alive, and they do that by a variety of different reasons. With different ways, rather. The first thing she does is she establishes an intimate relationship with them, which we don't think is happening here. At least it's been hinted at a little bit and joked about, but we haven't really seen it on screen, so I don't know if Alana and Lan are intimate. I don't think so, but it is joked about, and I think it's directly referencing that from the books. The second thing is you keep them busy. We see Lan in this episode carting a ton of water, and he actually complains, this much water for bread. Well, that's because they're keeping him busy. They're making him do useless tasks just to keep his mind off what's going on. They work him hard, so he's doing a lot of training on his own. And then they make friends with him. So the other warders, Ivan and Maxim, are actually trying to cozy up to Lan and make friends with him in different ways to keep an eye on him and keep him engaged so he doesn't fade away or kill himself, which happens a lot to warders who lose their Aes Sedai. So when that happened in the book series, the only thing that really snapped Lan out of it was the fact that Nynaeve needed protection and saving. That was it. He was horrible until that happened, and then he was horrible until he got to Nynaeve and basically was with her after that. So I think they're taking that storyline for a couple of different reasons and showcasing it right now, and that's either because we're not going to lose Moiraine at one point or another in the show, which I'd be okay with. It was kind of a strange storyline, and I don't know if we're getting the Elfin and the Aelfin like we did in the book series, and they're integral to that storyline. And Moiraine, let's face it, is not only a producer on the show, but she is basically the main character and the main build actress for the show. So to kill her off in a couple of seasons, leave her gone for a season or two, and have her come back may not make total sense. So they may be getting this out of the way right now to accelerate things, because let's face it, we have at max 8 seasons to get through the entire 14-book series, so they're going to have to cram a bunch of things together. So while there are some complaints out there from the fandom about this particular, the length of time Lan is like this, and I'm one of the ones that complained a little bit about it, I'd like it to be resolved sooner rather than later, it is fairly book accurate. Now, we just talked about warders wanting to fade away and die after their Aes Sedai is killed or their bond is broken. Now we're going to talk about pretty much the same thing with channelers. So we get to see another scene here with Moiraine, and we learn that her and her family are the ones responsible for Logain being placed in the sanatorium rather than in the White Tower to be poked and prodded and studied by the Yellow and the Brown sisters, which is sort of what happened to him in the books. He was placed in the White Tower. He was free to wander the tower grounds and do as he wished, but they still studied him, and he still had to kind of stay on the tower grounds, so he was a prisoner. So that was referenced here. But one of the fun things about this is that she's basically offering him death if he does what she wants, which is to teach Rand how to use the One Power. Rand has a different teacher in the book series. He actually learns from Asmodean, one of the Forsaken, and what happens there is Lanfear ties a shield off on Asmodean that lets just a trickle of power through, enough for him to be able to teach, but not enough for him to be able to do anything of consequence with it. And he teaches Rand for a bit, and then he ends up getting killed by another Forsaken, Grendel, much later on. There's a reason I gave full book spoilers for these videos, because we talk about stuff like this. I think what they're going to do is they're going to replace Asmodean with Logain as far as the teacher goes for a couple of different reasons. The first one being is, I'm not saying we're not getting Asmodean as a Forsaken, but I think Logain is going to have more of an impact on the show than he did in the book series. Because let's face it, he was kind of a fan favorite later on in the book series because he had some fairly big, hefty parts, and he played some big roles in a number of storylines, but it wasn't enough. He just sort of appeared, he did his thing, and then he went away. It was one of the complaints that some fans, including myself, had, that he didn't have enough time and page to really flesh out his character and his storyline. I think we're going to see that instead on screen. And with Alvaro Morte being the caliber of actor he is, I think more of him on screen is better than less. So he may take the place of Asmodean teaching Rand, or maybe he won't, and this is all just some big elaborate setup for him to eventually head to the rebels to oppose the White Tower. Who knows? We don't really know where they're going with this just yet. We just have theories. Next scene I want to talk about is this one between Liandrin and Lyanna Sedai. So essentially, this is a huge bit of foreshadowing for what happens in the book series, and I think we're going to see it early on in Season 3. At least right now, there's a ton of leaks that imply that we're going to see the Tower coup early in the season for Season 3. So what she's saying here is basically she's talking to Lyanna and she's asking where the Amberlin is. And we haven't seen the Amberlin on screen yet this season. We know we will because we've seen promotional material with Sophie, the actress who plays the Amberlin, but we don't know exactly where it's going to happen. Although my money's on Cairhien, considering the location and some of the pictures we've seen from the production team. Either way, during this, Liandrin actually states that if the Amberlin falls, so do you. And that is a direct reference to the Tower coup. So what happens in the book series is there is a coup against the Amberlin because she is found out to be helping the Dragon Reborn, Rand, and Elaida Sedai, who we have yet to be introduced to, which we'll likely see in Season 3, and I've already broke the news who plays that character, ends up taking the stole from her shoulders. Lyanna and the Amberlin are both stilled, and they eventually are helped to escape by Gowan, of all people, which is, I think, where we're going to see my favorite character in the next season. And they take Min along with Logain with them, and they head out towards where the rebel Aes Sedai are. In that time frame, we also get Gareth Bryn, we get a whole bunch of other storylines, but basically, I think this is a small bit of foreshadowing and setup for the fact that we're going to get the Tower coup in Season 3, and that likely the Amberlin will no longer be the Amberlin, and we'll end up seeing Elaida in a position of power. All right, next up we have some scenes between Elias and Perrin and Hopper. Now this is pretty interesting because this takes the place of a bunch of different stuff in the book series, but essentially they're using it to explain away what Wolf Brothers are. Their abilities are, how they speak to one another. We even get Hopper's name out of this particular scene, and I would say right now Hopper's probably the most favorite character in the cast. Just saying. So far, everyone seems to really love Hopper. And it's kind of interesting what they're doing here. So this is a great character development moment for Perrin and Elias, because we didn't get to see a whole lot of Elias on page. He was there for a brief period in the Eye of the World, and he didn't come back till much later on in the book series. And even then, he wasn't integral to a whole lot of plot lines. He was just kind of there in the background helping Perrin. So I think we're going to see more Elias in the show than we did in the books. But Hopper in the book series didn't last very long at all. I mean, and like I said, I gave you spoilers. Hopper dies. He does. And then he ends up assisting Perrin in the Wolf Dream a fair bit, teaching him his abilities, how to navigate Teleran Rioid, and actually speaks to him a whole lot and showcases all of his Wolf Brother talents to him there, and kind of acts as a guide, which is what we're seeing Elias sort of do so far, but not in the Wolf Dream just yet. I think what they're doing here on screen is they're having Hopper stay around a lot longer. We've seen Hopper with him throughout this episode, and we'll likely see him through the next few episodes. And I'm not saying that they're not going to mirror or parallel the storylines of the book series where Hopper does die and Perrin meets him in the Wolf Dream, but I think that they will do that. But they have to set up Hopper as being a more important character first, and a little bit more emotionally attached to Perrin than he was in the books, because Perrin was upset about it in the books, sure, but he hadn't been around him a whole lot. Here he's actually making friends with Hopper before that happens. So either way, a great bit of character development and setting up something that I think is going to happen much later on in the season. All right, so now we have Rand and Selene. Now, Rand's been staying in Selene's inn in the Foregate, and he burned it down at the end of the last episode. We all saw that. And he felt bad, so he cleaned it up a bit, and now he's gone on a trip with her. They're in the mountains just outside Cairhien called Kinslayer's Dagger. Now, there's a whole lot of foreshadowing here about who Lanfear is, how she came to be, who her ex-lover was in the kind of conversation back and forth, and she is definitely manipulating Rand. We've seen a fair bit of this on page in The Great Hunt, but not a ton. So when Rand met Selene in The Great Hunt, she manipulated him in a bunch of different ways. She wanted him to be more confident. She loved his lack of confidence. She liked it when he was confident, and when he was confident, he was too confident. She kept him on his toes emotionally, all the while basically seducing him the entire time. They've accelerated all that a ton in the show, and they've essentially become sort of a couple at this point. Not really a couple, but definitely friends with benefits. And this is, I think, on purpose. So they're making the audience kind of feel for this Selene character, and people who haven't read the books have no idea who she actually is, and people who've read the books, we all know that she's actually Lanfear, and that this is an integral part of the story, but they've sort of sped everything up. So her jealousy, her attachment, all of the things that are going to happen much later are going to make a lot more sense than perhaps just, this is a reincarnation of my old lover, and I really want him, which is what happened in the book series. All right, remember I said there wasn't a whole lot of Min in Mat? Well, this is the only scene we really get from him in this particular episode, and I don't think we're going to see a ton of them this season. it's one of those things, like in the books, there are going to be certain time frames when characters that you truly love and you truly want to see or read about, they're just not going to be there. But they're setting all of this up for Min to take Mat to Cairhien. Now, Cairhien is pretty important for Mat in the book series for a bunch of different reasons, but right now, in the book series, what had happened was Rand has made his way to Cairhien with Selene and Huron at Sniffer. While he's there, he ends up meeting Tom Merrilin, which we don't have this season. I think Moiraine's taking the place of Tom Merrilin for his plot lines in that particular section. And he also meets Varen Sedai, and Varen Sedai is the one that basically leads him at the end of it, after Tom has done all this masterful maneuvering for Rand, to be invited to a party at Lord Barthane's manor, and they get to actually go. Now, Rand goes as a young lord, you have Varen as herself, you have, of course, Mat and Huron as servants, and there's also all the Shienarans. There's a ton of people there, but they go there because the horn and the dagger are there, and that's what they're chasing. Now, we're not going to see that in the show because the horn right now is with the Seanchan and Falm, and we're pretty sure the dagger is still with Fane at this point. But I think what's going to happen here is we're leading up to the part where Mat and Min go to Cairhien, and they're going to join Rand and Moiraine and go all the way to Falm with them. Likely through the ways. I don't think we're going to see portal stones. I'd really love that, but I don't think we're going to see that. They're going to go through the ways there, and then that way Mat can actually get the dagger back. So we've already seen promotional material at this point showcasing Mat sitting with the dagger, so we know he sees it at some point or another, and the backgrounds of it seem to suggest some of the buildings in Falm, so we know that Mat's going to be in Falm. And there was also that pesky commercial that showed Mat charging ahead of all the heroes of the Horn in battle at Falm, so we know he's going to be there. So likely this is just a setup to get him in Falm, and then after that we may not see a whole lot of him until next season. One of the things the show has done really well so far is humanizing characters that didn't really have many human qualities to them in the book series. And that is pretty much every antagonist in the book series. Not all of them, but a fair number of them. Liandrin is no exception to that. What we're seeing in the show is people love Liandrin. They really do. They know her motivations behind what's going on. They see her as a real person. They understand, they may not agree with, but they understand her motivations for turning to the dark. And this is one of those scenes that sets all of that up. She's manipulating Nynaeve the entire time, but she's also peppering it with just enough real world or real experiences that she's had, and being vulnerable just enough that we see some of that human shining through. And she does truly regret what she's doing, but she's doing it for a purpose. I love this. Now, in the book series, Liandrin just grabbed them and said, let's go. And they followed her willingly through the Waygate, and they went all the way to Falm. We're not really seeing that here. We're seeing a much more manipulative Liandrin, and we're also seeing all of the reasons why she's doing what she's doing. We never got any of that in the book series. It was mentioned that she was poor and wanted to be rich, and that was pretty much her entire motivation. She wanted things she couldn't have, and she hated the fact that she was poor and other people had things she didn't. That's why she turned to the dark. Not a terrible motivation, but certainly not nearly compelling enough for a good slow burn drama like The Wheel of Time is this season. So I think interspersing her son along with all of this other dialogue with Nynaeve, where she's expressing regret on what she's doing, is a really smart choice for the character. All right, next up we have Min and her dreams. Now this is a fair bit different in the book series, but I think it's also leading up to the same motivations that her character had in the books. So essentially, Min, for a long time in the book series, thought her visions were a curse. She didn't want them anymore, and she tried very hard to get rid of them. A lot of that didn't happen on page. It wasn't like it was written from her point of view, and she was actively trying to get rid of them, but she told a lot of stories about when she was younger, about how she kind of suppressed them and just kind of ignored them for a very long time, because no matter what she did, she couldn't change them, and it just bothered her a ton. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing people ask about their futures, and she's seeing terrible things, and she doesn't want to talk to them about it. But what's interesting here is we see a Shamael show up, and this is Tel'aran'rhiod because a Shamael showing up in her dream to talk to her. And if you notice the candle in the lower left-hand corner here, if you freeze it right here, it almost looks exactly like the symbol at the beginning of any of the Tel'aran'rhiod chapters in the book series, which I thought was pretty neat, and I missed it in my Easter egg video. So, she didn't want her visions. In the book series, she was, I don't want to say a minor character, but she didn't really fit in a whole lot until after book 3. There was spits and spats for here and there, but she wasn't really showcased on page a whole lot, and it wasn't until much later when she actually ended up with the Tower Rebels, and then with Rand himself in a lot of his storylines later on, that she became a much more central version to different plot lines within the books. At this point in the series, during the Great Hunt, she doesn't have a whole lot of time on page. They don't talk about her a whole ton. She's there, don't get me wrong, she is in the book, but she's not a main character by any stretch of the imagination. And her motivations are, for what she does, are just kind of tagging along with people more than anything else. She's seen visions, she knows things has to happen, and she's just sort of going with the flow. That might work on screen, but I don't think it would work as well as what they're doing here. She's actively trying to rid herself of the visions, which is why she got a hold of Liandrin. Liandrin said, you take Mat to Cairhien and we'll talk. So she's on the way to Cairhien right now with Mat. She meets Ishamael, and this is where she first starts to realize, maybe I bit off more than I can chew, because Liandrin just isn't as nice as I. She's now mixed up with Dark Friends and the Chosen and all kinds of different people. Is she willing to do their bidding to get rid of her visions? Now, everybody who's read the books will probably say likely that's not going to happen in any way, shape, or form. But a lot of people who haven't, that are just watching the show for the first time, they really don't know a whole lot about who Min is or how her abilities work at this point. So it is a good play on where she's at in the books, and I think it's a much better way to showcase her getting to Falme and then to the Tower afterwards than what's going on right now. All right, then we have this scene with Rand and Selene, or Lanfear, and we get to see a couple of different things happen here. And I think this is the first time that anybody who didn't read the books that watched the show really started to question Selene's motivations and why she's doing what she's doing. Because she flip-flopped really quick in this scene, and she is totally not all there, and it shows. Essentially what goes on here is Rand and Selene are together, and a Fade finds them. Rand uses the one power to kill the Fade. Now, a lot of people were asking if that was balefire. Is that what happened here? I don't think so. I think this was just regular fire that he used against the Fade. And she freaks out because he can channel, and then he mentions something to the fact that I'm going to leave because most men who can channel kill the ones they love first. And then her response is, oh, you love me, which is totally not normal at all. And that leads to them getting back into the cabin and her sort of trying to have her way with him. During that time frame, you get to see her channeling as well. Now, there's been a whole lot of talk of what that meant. I think what we're seeing there is what Rand can see. The scene is from his point of view, and when Lanfear starts to channel when she's on top of him, I think it's their version of the goosebumps. Because in the book series, when a woman channels around a man, the man gets goosebumps. It feels a little bit of a chill, so he has a bit of an advantage knowing when a woman is holding the one power, and women have none of that. So I think what we're seeing here is they sort of showcased warping of the air, a feeling around her when Rand was underneath and he was asking what was going on. And then, of course, the big culmination end of the episode, you see a sword burst through her chest. Moiraine comes out of nowhere, cuts her throat, and then yells at Rand, we have to get out of here. And that all ends with her blinking at the end of the season, end of the episode, which is really a great way to end the episode, a really great cliffhanger. And there's a lot to unpack here. So these scenes, they never happen. This is a culmination of a bunch of different little things within the book series they kind of put together to make sense for the story for the show. But there are a couple of things that are true to the books. The first is the way Lanfear is acting. Her motivations and the way she's completely unhinged with Rand, totally true to the books, 100%. The second thing is she dies. Moiraine kills her, and Forsaken can be killed by regular means. In fact, a bunch of them in the books are at a number of different times. But what happens at that point is the Dark One takes their souls, because he's Lord of the Grave, remember? He takes them at the moment of their death and crams them into someone else, and then they get up in that new body and they do his bidding. They're not doing that with the show for a bunch of different reasons, but I think the first one is logistical. You don't want to start getting attached to a character and have them change to somebody else. It's kind of hard for the audience. It doesn't make sense because then you'd have to hire a bunch more actors and actresses to do different roles, and this happens a fair bit. Like, it's just not one or two times. It happens a lot in the book series where Forsaken dies and is brought back. So having the Dark One kind of cram them back into their own body, because you see her blinking at the end of the episode, I think is a pretty smart way of doing things, because it just means they can't really be killed by conventional means. And I think it's going to make balefire much, much more important for what happens in the show. All right, so a ton of stuff happened in this episode. Like I said, a lot of storylines were set up in that major cliffhanger at the end. Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens with that one for episode 5. But They're doing a very, very good job this season, not only with the pacing, with keeping up with all of the characters, but keeping multiple different storylines that involve most of the characters so far. And you'll notice that in this particular episode, and this whole season, in fact, there hasn't been a whole lot of Matt or Min, and people have sort of complained about that just a little bit. But you have to remember, in the book series, when you're reading the books, you'd go entire books without seeing certain characters at all, and that's part of where the slog came from, because a lot of people were thinking and hoping and waiting to read the next book as it came out because they had a certain favorite character in mind, and then bam, they weren't in that particular book at all. There was not even really a mention of them. And a lot of people are very upset, and they're reading about characters that they at that time didn't particularly care about. So that's sort of, I think, what's happening here in the show. We're picking and choosing between different people. Doesn't mean we're not all going to get every single player that should be in Falm at the end of the season in Falm. I think we will, and I think they're kind of setting up for a big climactic end. I think we are getting that big fight in the sky, so I'm excited for that. Now, let me know in the comments down below what you folks thought of this particular episode. What do you think of these breakdowns? Is there anything you'd like to see me include? I'm trying to reference stuff from the books and explain the scenes, but if there's anything else you folks want me to add in these, we have a couple of episodes left. I have no problem adding them in as we go. All right, thank you so very much for sticking with us here to the very end. Here's to many more.